today we're going to be talking a little bit about debate theory and how you can use it inside of a debate in order to get some advantage over your opponents. Now, have you ever been in a situation where you enter into a debate round, you're all prepared to go, and then somebody gives you sort of a sketch argument, meaning they throw something at you you hadn't thought of? Well, this has happened to all debaters, and trust me, there's a way to deal with this. So in order to do this, we're going to have to go to the universe before universes. Now, you don't have to worry. This is not going to be some analogy to Loki time machines or something like that. No, this is a way for us to think about how we can use different worlds or universes of debate in order to get a little bit of an upper hand against those sketchy debaters we're going to face inside of rounds. In order to do this, let's get back to some basics. Okay. So I'm going to switch over and make another analogy here. We're going to take a look at the football field. Think of for a moment that you're a debater, but in this case, you're on the 50-yard line. Now, you're facing your goal line and you're charging ahead in order to get a touchdown. At the 50-yard line, you are at what we call the place of fiat. What does that mean? So fiat is the idea that when you say something in a debate, it happens. When I'm on the affirmative side and I say I'm going to do something in debate, that basically becomes the world that we are going to argue in. Now, why do we do that in the world of debate? We don't argue in debate about whether or not an action could happen. We argue about what the consequences of that action are going to be. So when I say I fiat something to existence, it makes it happen. If I say we're going to raise the minimum wage, we fiat the minimum wage. If I say that we're going to create peace in the Middle East, we fiat peace in the Middle East. In other words, we create the action and then we argue about the consequences afterwards. That's called fiat. We make the action happen. Now, after that is called post fiat. So think of that as the 40-yard line, the 30-yard line, the 20-yard line, the 10-yard line, and so forth. Each one of those areas is what we call post fiat. So again, 50-yard line, I make it happen. 40, 30, 20, 10, post fiat. Or what are the consequences? And that's what we're debating about. We're debating about the positive and negative consequences of once we fiated an action into taking place. But there's a whole nother world for us to consider, another universe, or to mix my analogies here again, all of those yard lines that it took to get up to the 50-yard line, that's called the pre-fiat world. So think of before we get to the 50-yard line, the other teams, 10, 20, 30, 40, all of those yard lines are what we call the pre-fiat world. Well, in debate, what is that analogy? The pre-fiat world includes all the rules and the assumptions that allow us to make that statement at the 50-yard line. So again, we got three worlds here, three parts of the football field. The 50-yard line, we fiat it into action. The post-fiat world, 40, 30, 20, 10-yard lines, the consequences. And then the opposite side of the field, 10, 20, 30, 40-yard lines, that's pre-fiat, the assumptions and rules that allow us to make that fiated statement. Okay, so today what we're going to deal with is the pre-fiat world, but we're going to deal with the issue of rules in debate. We call this debate theory. Now, let's get started with something really clear. There is no such thing as a debate rules handbook. Whenever I teach debate theory, I always get a student who raises his hand and says, where do I find this debate rules handbook you're talking about? Well, you're not going to find it anywhere because there is no such thing. It doesn't exist anywhere. Debate theory is really not about rules and whether or not we're doing something right or wrong. It's about strategy. That's what I want you to think about with debate when it comes to pre-fiat and it comes to debate theory. It's about strategy. It's the question of how do we say that a debater has basically done something that breaks the rules, that makes his fiated statement unfair, or the term we use, abusive to us. Now, when we think of debate theory, here are the sections of debate theory that we want to think of, or the elements of what's called a debate theory shell. First off is what's called the interpretation. The interpretation is a positive statement on what debaters ought to do when they are debating. The next is really easy, violation. You just say, hey, that debater over there, he violated the rule. Then comes the standard. The standard is why this debate theory should be accepted. And our typical ones that we say is what's called it skewed our time, meaning it took away our time from being able to make a good argument, or it skewed the ground, meaning they actually made a statement that took away ground from us that we could have used in order to debate, or it took away our arguments. It basically was stated in such a way that we can't link a lot of our arguments in, like our disadvantages and our counterplans. Next off of that is voters. Think of voters as sort of like impacts, and there are two big ones that we use: fairness and education. Because the debater is making this argument, it's not fair, or it decreases our overall education. Then the last thing you have to say is whether or not this debate theory is going to drop the argument or drop the debater. If you drop the argument, all it means is, hey, we're basically going to drop this argument. We're not going to look to it. If we drop the debater, it means the debater loses. And we really mean this. Remember, this is pre-Fiat world. If they violate something in pre-Fiat world, that's basically the rules that lead up to debate. They lose right off the top. Okay, let's give an example of how this works. I want to give a very specific example, and we're going to use the topic that is being argued about right now. The topic we're arguing about right now is and in future years, as you're watching this video, this is of course going to be a different topic, but for us in this particular year, I think it's a good one to take a look at. Ought the United States government stop extraction of fossil fuels on public lands? Well, what if a team argued this? A team said, we're just going to look at just the issue of extracting coal on public lands. Okay, tough one, right? Because if they argue that, that takes away from all the other fossil fuels, things like oil, or the use of electricity, or any other types of things that we might attach to the issue of fossil fuels. Okay, how would you argue against this? Here's what our shell could look like. First off, interpretation. Aft debaters need to uphold the entire resolution. Next up, violation. Really simple. Our opponent is only arguing about coal. They're not arguing about the whole resolution. Now comes our standards. This skews our strategy by delinking from our arguments on other types of fossil fuels. Next, voters. This hurts education since we cannot argue about all the key issues. And then last off, we argue, make sure you drop the debater. So what are we going to take away from this? Hey, let's be honest. All debaters are sketchy. In fact, I coach debaters to be sketchy. We're creative, we're intelligent, and this is about strategy. We want to win the debate round. So we just know debaters are going to come in not because they're attempting to be abusive or they want to violate rules, but because they're looking for a creative way to win. Our job is to make sure that we have a strategy to deal with that. And our way of dealing with that is by understanding Fiat, post-Fiat, and pre-Fiat, and using theory to our advantage to make sure debaters are forced right back into our area of argument, or we just win the debate. Okay, see you in the next round.